Okay, so last week we were talking about Jerusalem. We're going to kind of finish this up today. And, Zechariah talks about a time when Jerusalem is going to be a burdensome stone for the people, and people are going to burden themselves with it. That's today. As we saw last week, that Jerusalem wasn't always a burdensome stone. People just forgot about it. It was ignored. But today, we live in this time that Zechariah spoke about thousands of years ago. A time when Jerusalem was going to be a problem for the world. It was going to be a controversy, and that God was going to gather the people to it. So we're going to finish with that today. And then we finished last time with the 6-day war, right? Israel's enemies surrounded them. Israel attacks. And in 6 days, who wins a war in 6 days? It just doesn't happen, right? This is obviously guided by the hand of God. And what happens is, pre-1967, Judea and Samaria, that's the West Bank. That's the mountains of Israel. We're going to see that a little bit later. Is controlled along with East Jerusalem. Remember where all the holy sites were? The Temple Mount is controlled by Jordan at this point. And then they just annihilate them. They take all that territory. They take a lot of Egypt, which they later give back. But today they still control all of Jerusalem and the West Bank. Now it might bring to mind the words of the Lord Jesus Christ when he's talking about the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. He says, "And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled." Now, some think that this was fulfilled in 1967. No longer is there a foreign occupier of Jerusalem. The Jews have all of the city. Now, and then some say, well, it's not going to be completely fulfilled, of course, until the Lord Jesus Christ returns. But either way, this event is very, very significant because it has a lot to do with end-time prophecy. The Jews have to control Jerusalem to fulfill these end-time prophecies and establish God's kingdom. Now, we know from Daniel and from other passages that that's God's plan, to establish his kingdom, right? But to do that, there's a kingdom that's in the way, and that's the kingdom of man, and that has to be removed. However, these two kingdoms do have something in common. They're both kingdoms, and you need 5 things, at least, to have a kingdom, right? You need land and people. 1948, land and people, we got it. You need a capital city, Jerusalem, now in control of the Jews. 1967. And then you need a king, and you need law. So we've got 3 of the things already. We're waiting for one other thing to happen. And it shall come to pass in the last days, many people shall go and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of God of Jacob. And he will teach us of his ways, and will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, in the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." So are we waiting for the law to come first or the king? The king gives the law, right? So Jesus is going to come, and then he's going to declare the law. So that's what we're waiting for. 3 things are already set up, prepared for the return of the king. And then when he comes, he's going to stand up and he's going to deliver the law, and the world's going to have to submit to it. Now, our community, our teacher is here. Hi, Deb. Thanks, Deb. Betanique, you guys can go down. I won't bore you anymore. Jacob, you have to stay and be punished. Now, again, 1967, right? When it happened, it would have been great excitement. Would have been a great excitement for our community. And this is a brother Fred Bilton, in, I forget what it was, Tidings, Christadelphian, some Christadelphian magazine, wrote in 1955, a dozen years before before 67 happens. And this is what he writes. Because Jerusalem, the old city, that's East Jerusalem, or where the Temple Mount, all those holy sites are, must be possessed by the Jews prior to the return of Christ, so that he might manifest himself to them as their deliverer and savior. The ejection of Hashemite Jordan, that's the Jordanian kingdom that at this time controls the West Bank and East Jerusalem. He says they've got to be ejected. From there it's a foregone conclusion, because he knows his scripture. He said they've got to be removed. Today they control Jerusalem, they control the West Bank, but they've got to be gone. And we can look then for developments which will result in Israel getting possession of the whole city. A dozen years later it happens, right? It's because our community knows the scriptures. We can be confident in that. And then he goes on to say, and for a dreadful conflagration, if I'm pronouncing that right, kindled by that spark throughout the Middle East. Now, so they're going to be removed. He says that, right? And he says because of that, there's going to be this conflagration. And that means a destructive fire. Okay? Now let's turn to Zechariah. Zechariah chapter 14. Zechariah 14, we're going to start in verse 2. It says, "For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as he fought in the day of battle." Jerusalem is going to be the kindle that starts that fire, right? And fire in Scripture, anyone know what fire in Scripture represents?
Purification.
Judgment. There's going to be a judgment. Jerusalem is going to be the focal point of Armageddon. And we get that same type of language when you go to Revelation, you read about Armageddon. And then when we look at verse 4, it says, "And he shall stand, and his feet shall stand in the day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in its midst toward the east and toward the west, and there shall be a very great valley. And half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half toward the south." So there's going to be this great earthquake, right? So for those who think, well, you know what? The fulfillment of Jesus' words of the Gentile rule, you got to get rid of what Daniel called the abomination of desolation. The dome of the rock that stands on the Temple Mount, the mosques that are there, and all the other holy sites. Well, when that earthquake happens, they're going to be removed. There was a, what do they call the earthquake people? Seismologists?
Yeah.
Is that right, Katie? Okay. They were asked about this. What if this happened? What if there was an earthquake that would split that mountain? And we know that it's going to change the topography of Israel, right? Jerusalem is going to be elevated. What type of effect would this have in the world? And this guy said, well, there wouldn't be a two-story building standing in the world. It's going to be that dramatic of an event. So that's certainly going to take away the holy sites of man. So let's go to, let's take a look at, 1967, again, dramatic events. This is the aftershock. Some of the things that came out of this Six-Day War. One of them is Israel is now recognized as a military power in the Middle East. And the U.S. sees them as a valuable ally in the region. U.S.-Israeli relations really increase at this time. And not only that, but there starts to become an economic boom in Israel after this event. And remember, when they came in 1948, they came in as agriculturists into the desert. Right? That's not going to be a great economy, right? They were pretty poor. If they didn't have money pouring in from the diaspora, from the Jews outside, they don't survive. And they get a lot of help from the countries like America, too. They don't survive, but now there's an economic boom. So that plays into it. Because why does the Gog and Magog come down? For a spoil. right? There's wealth. Well, now they're very wealthy, right? They have a lot of things that would be valuable. Technology, they're fantastic with technology, right? They've now found those huge natural gas fields off the coast, oil fields, right? So there's a lot of spoil now in that area. Another thing that came out of this was the rise of Islamic extremism, terrorism, which became the new strategy of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. The Palestinian Arabs, they now realize, we really can't defeat these guys in a conventional war. They just keep humiliating us. So they decide that we're going to resort to terrorism, anti-Semitism, and propaganda. And you know what? It's working for them. Prior to 1967, Israel was the underdog, and everyone was, gotta root for Israel. They're the underdog. We love to root for the underdog. But as maybe you'll remember from the recent Gaza war, well, they're the bullies now. Now it's a genocide going on. They're trying to wipe out the Palestinians, and the media is portraying it that way. They're referring to it's like the Holocaust all over again, right? So their strategy is really working. And the other thing, here's the burdensome stone for all the nations. There was never a peace, there was no peace process before 1967. The two-state solution, all of that doesn't come about until after 67. Before, there were just threats going back and forth and a few skirmishes, but there was no peace process. So now we're going to look a little bit at the terrorism aspect. Now, I'm going to show a picture that I think is a bit of an iconic picture. So no one say anything, but just raise your hand if you recognize this picture. What that is from? 2, 3, 4, 5. What's it from? That's right, yeah. I recognized, I didn't see what it was from. I think that's a Palestinian terrorist. Life magazine, 1972, Munich Olympics, Munich, Germany. From this small Israeli team, 11 would die. So 5 Palestinian terrorists went in to the hotel rooms of these 11 Jewish athletes. And they took them hostage. The media gathered around. This is before the games began. Media gathers around. They proclaim hey, you're not listening to us. We're being oppressed by the Jews. You got to hear our problem. And in Israel, and there's media all over the place, right? And Israel calls up the German officials and they say, listen, we're sending our special ops guys. They know how to deal with them. And Germany said, no, we'll handle it. But the world doesn't know how to handle terrorism at this point. And Germany botches the whole thing incredibly. The terrorists say, have a plane ready at the airport, blah, blah, blah. The German officials start shooting. All 11 of the hostages die. They kill, I think they killed 2 of the 5 terrorists, and the other 3 are put in prison. The world is outraged. Israel is outraged. You should have let us go. You don't know what you're doing. Well, what happens later? A month later, there was the Lufthansa hijacking. You might remember that, right? And the demands was to free those 3 terrorists, Palestinians. Free those and give us a few $1 million, and we're not going to blow this plane up. And not only that, Germany, we promise that we'll never have any more terrorist attacks on German soil. It was only a month later. Immediately, Germany says, okay. They free those terrorists. They don't consult with any other international countries, nothing. They immediately do it. And those people, those terrorists escape, and they land in Libya, where they're welcomed by Gaddafi, and they're made heroes. And they are never brought to trial. They live a luxurious life after that. Israel is, just like, what are you doing? Right? They're all upset. There was all sorts of conspiracy theories that came about that Germany was all part of it. But Germany said, we were so terrorized. We were terrorized because we screwed up the first time. All 11 died. And now, we don't want to get involved in the Arab-Israeli conflict. We want to stay out of it. So if we can just get rid of these guys, that'll be fine. The world didn't know how to handle terrorism. So this is just a little clip I have of Yasser Arafat. All this, by the way, was orchestrated by Yasser Arafat. And this is a clip of him before the United Nations in 1974. Just 2 years. Oh, hang on. I guess we have no volume. Anyway, this is him. He's going to come before the UN. Now here he's walking in and waving to all the, and look, they all stand up, a standing ovation before the United Nations. 2 years after this terrorist attack.
What year was that, John?
1974.
74.
1974. And this is what he says: I come to you bearing an olive branch in one hand and a freedom fighter's gun in the other. You know, he's not a terrorist, he's a freedom fighter. I mean, we need freedom from the Jews. See how he spins it? But now he like threatens the United Nations. Right? You better not let this olive branch fall, because there'll be terrorism. That's what he's saying. Threatening the UN, but gets a standing ovation. What's the matter with people? What's the matter with the nation? They're fearful of this guy.
Well, he took down the plane in Libya, took down
That's
the
right.
Lockerbie.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. And he's considered the father of modern day terrorism. The whole plane things, right? All the 9/11, Lockerbie, right? And those hit home. And he's considered the father of modern day terrorism. And he's got quite a resume, from bombings and kidnappings, hijackings, embassy attacks. In 1974, he blew up a Jewish school, killing 24 children. But you know what happened in the Olympics, right? In the Olympics, after all that happened, the games got to go on. They still had the games. That's the society in which we live. The games must go on. If you know anything about Rome, when they were falling, when they were getting starved out by the barbarian nations, you know, the games went on. They still had all the Roman games. Those have got to go while we're falling here. So, these guys, that's President Clinton in the middle, Yasser Arafat, and Yitzhak Rabin, Prime Minister of Israel. And one of the stories I really like about the angels is the one when Daniel is praying and praying and praying, and then finally Gabriel comes to him and says, "Sorry, Daniel, I heard your prayer, but I was tied up with the king of Persia, right? I was working with him, and he wasn't quite doing what he wanted, and I was struggling." And then Michael came, the archangel came, and he took over. So now I'm free to come. You know, and it's the working of the angels, working out God's plan. It doesn't just happen magically, right? There's some workings going on there. Remember, we talked about how the world is really trying to force this peace issue. They think if we can get peace in the Middle East, we'll have peace everywhere. It'll get rid of terrorism that the world is so fearful of today, right? And God says, I got a different plan. I'm looking for the true peace. Because to get peace, you need righteousness. It's the manifestation. Peace is the manifestation of righteousness. And man is not righteous. And God's saying, no, we're going to go through this, and then I'm going to put the righteous one in place. And then we're going to have true peace. So I just want to go through some of the couple of peace processes that have happened. And we'll just see how God frustrates the plan. That the angels are right there whispering to these guys. Nah, do this. Nah, do that. And they're frustrating the whole plan. So these two guys, so Prime Minister, this is 1993, the Oslo Accord. Okay, Rabin offers Arafat a withdrawal from the West Bank and from Gaza. And all the Palestinians have to do is recognize the right of Israel to exist. Oh, how can you pass up that? All you got to do is just say we get the right to exist. And both sides agree that, you know what, Jerusalem, we'll just deal with that later. Because no one knows what to do with Jerusalem. We'll just come to that later. We'll work on this. Now, some terrorist groups, Hamas, and some other extremist groups decide that we don't want peace. So they start to send suicide bombers into Jerusalem in hopes to derail this whole peace process. And it really ends up going nowhere, though these two guys win a Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah, Yasser Arafat, right? 1972 Olympic massacre leader. Bombings of schools, killing of men. Nobel Peace Prize winner for a peace accord that didn't really end up going anywhere at all. The other interesting thing is Rabin. He's willing to give up God's land. Willing to give it up. He's assassinated 2 years later. In 2000, Camp David II. Clinton again. This time he's hosting Prime Minister Barak, because of course Rabin is dead. And again, Yasser Arafat. Barak now offers 96% of the West Bank and Gaza. And Clinton says, listen, and I'm going to get you part of the old city of Jerusalem. The Jews will keep the Jewish part of the old city and the Armenian part, and you'll get the Christian part and the Arab part. And this will serve as your capital of your new Palestinian state. This is what they've been crying for, right? However, they said, when we give you all this, that's the end of the conflict. There's no more conflict. This is the end of it. Much to the surprise of the U.S. and Israeli negotiators, Arafat walked away from the deal. He said, no, thank you. Now, some UN observers reported that Prime Minister Barak verbally offered to give all of East Jerusalem for the future capital of the Palestinian state, and still Arafat refused. And there was a lot of confusion. What's he walking away from? This is exactly what they've been crying for, and we're going to give it all to them. When asked about, why did he walk away, the U.S. chief negotiator, a man named Dennis Ross, said, for him to end the conflict was to end himself. Right? This is what he is. He's a terrorist. If there's peace, he's out of work. Right? The Palestinians get all their money. First they sell. The regular people sell their produce to the Jews. If the Jews aren't there, they have no one to sell it to, and their leaders make all their money because they get money from Iran. Hey, keep the terrorism up. We'll keep funding you the cash. So to put an end to this problem puts this guy out of business. He doesn't want it. And as far as Mr. Clinton, why does every president get involved in the peace process? Why are they so interested in getting this peace process done? Arafat, when leaving, said to Mr. Clinton, you're a great man. And Clinton responded, I'm not a great man, and that is because of you. If you had agreed to this deal, I would have been the guy who brought peace to the Middle East. And then I would have been a great man. I would have been guaranteed a peace prize. But you ruined it. We can see God working, right? Frustrating the plans of mankind, because God has a different plan. This is a what?
Who are we to say to Arafat that we would give him?
Yeah. So that was.
I just want to know.
Yeah, that was part of the U.S. being able to put a lot of pressure on Israel to be able to do that. We can make this concession for you. So this is a letter that Arafat wrote to Rabin after the Oslo Accord. He says, the PLO, we recognize the right of the state of Israel to exist in peace and security. There was another, in 2003, the Geneva Accord said, there was a bit of a change of course to emphasize the agreement from which will come peace and safety. So it became, when they would sit down to negotiate, Israel would say, all right, now we need some goodwill from you guys if we're going to negotiate. Stop throwing bombs into our city. Stop sending in these suicide bombers so we can sit down and negotiate. And they were like, no, we're going to continue to do that. So then they went, all right, so what we'll do is we'll just work on the agreement. We'll work on the agreement, and then when we have the agreement, when we have this peace treaty, then will come peace and security. And if you've been following any of the Iran nuclear deal, all the leaders of the world, not just the United States, but all the leaders of the world who are in favor of it, all have said it's going to bring peace and security to the region. Well, those words are familiar to us. Paul speaking about the return of Christ. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction come upon them. So maybe there's going to be some sort of a peace deal that Israel will think, and they'll trusting in man instead of God. We've got it. We've got the peace deal. Perhaps. And I think this is, it's got some application to AD 70. When the Romans surrounded Jerusalem, and then the Brotherhood must have been like, remember the words of Christ? He said that they were going to surround, and then they were called away. They went down to Egypt, and they went, okay, we're fine then. They're gone. And then they came back, and then the destruction happened. Here's another man. This is an interesting story as well. Ariel Sharon fought in 1948 War of Independence as an infantry guy, worked his way up to a general, fought in all 4 major wars, a war hero. He was nicknamed the Lion of God because he went out and captured the land that God had promised to the Jews and was instrumental in like every war, made massive decisions where they looked back and went, that was the key. Who decided that? Ariel Sharon. And he became the prime minister in 2001. He was for the settlement building the housing in East Jerusalem. He was all for it. And the West Bank, let's build, let's build. However, in 2003, when all the cries of peace are coming about, we've got to have peace, he became, maybe if we cave to the Palestinian demands, to terrorism, and he became a supporter of the two-state solution. And in 2005, he ordered a withdrawal from Gaza. Land for peace. And this is the first time Israel ever gave up the land that God promised to them. And there are some pictures, I didn't put any in, but there's some pictures of, he sent in the army. Some people left, he told them, you got to leave, we'll pay you, get out. And some people said, this is our land, we're not leaving. And he sent in the army. And you can see the army crying as they're pulling families out, Jews out of the land, and they're all crying. Right? So it was a pretty trying time. And then in 2006, there was a man named Othniel Schneller. And this man was known as the map maker. And he is summoned to Sharon's office, and he had drawn up plans by the request of Sharon to plans for the future borders of Israel. And the plans detailed the withdrawal of the West Bank and parts of Jerusalem. And at the end of the meeting, Sharon agrees with the map that this is going to be the basis for Israel's withdrawal and the creation of the Palestinian state. Before they can dot all the I's and cross all the T's, 2 hours later, he suffers a massive stroke. He's in a coma for 8 years. He never comes out of it. He dies in 2014. He was going to give up God's land. Right? Rabin was going to give up God's land. Barak was going to give up God's land. After that peace deal that Barak had, he resigned. That failed, he resigned. You think the angels are working there? You're going to give up land? Out you go. 2015. Netanyahu, right? He's running for re-election, and it's not looking good. He's the guy that's out. The polls, he's way behind in the polls. It looks like there's going to be a new prime minister. I think it was 2 days before the polls closed, he makes a public announcement. I'll never give up land. I'm never going to do it. There'll never be a two-state solution. I'm not giving up the promised land. Bang, he wins. Wow, what a comeback. He won. Coincidence? I think it's God working. That's what he does, right? When I first heard the Ariel Sharon Brother Andy Walton, he does the Weekly World Watch, does a great job. He does the whole class on Ariel Sharon. I listened to it a few years ago. He goes into some other detail, and it's kind of like, geez, I don't know. Some of that's a bit of a stretch, Andy, I think. But I have to think about it. I'm like, it's exactly how God works. We know that he works in the kingdoms of men. He puts in there who he wants, and he removes who he doesn't. And he works through individuals, right? It's the only reason why we're here today. All right. Let's get back to the burden of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a tinderbox that could go off at any time. All roads in our part of the world, all conflicts lead to Jerusalem. King Abdullah of Jordan in 2010. Jerusalem's political standing has long been one of the most sensitive issues in American foreign policy, and indeed the most delicate issue in international affairs. Now this guy, General Varela, speaking before the Supreme Court, this is in response to the Foreign Relations Act of 2002 under President George Bush. And now in this Foreign Relations Act, there's section after there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sections dealing with all sorts of things like, hey, we're going to give this foreign country some money. Where do we want them to allocate it to? Make sure this goes towards education, right? Or, hey, we have a problem over here because one of our U.S. citizens was killed. Boom, this is how we're going to deal with it. So there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these sections. But one of the sections deals with Jerusalem being the capital of Israel. We're going to officially recognize that. And we're going to, on passports, if a person is born in Jerusalem, they can say, my birthplace is Israel. Again, associating Jerusalem with Israel. Upon signing this agreement, George Bush says, I'm going to sign this, but I object to Section 214. Any guesses on which one that was? Yeah, the one talking about Jerusalem, right? He goes, not only do I object it, I'm not going to allow the State Department to issue those passports. Well, just this past year, the parents of a 12-year-old boy who was born in Jerusalem sought to have Israel listed on the passport according to this law. And the State Department said no. They took it to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court response was in favor of the State Department, claiming that recognition of foreign countries and their boundaries are up to the president. The judge explained that U.S. presidents for 60 years have stayed neutral on the status of Jerusalem. It's because they don't know what to do with it. But God knows. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, that's Jerusalem. In the mountains of his holiness, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion, the city of the great King. Again, Jerusalem, in the city of the Almighty Lord, in the city of our God, God makes her secure forever. Not the peace deals of mankind, but God will make that secure. So it's the president that decides. You know what? We don't have the volume. Anyway, it was President Obama before a group of people, before he was elected president, okay? And he says, Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and it will never be divided, and the place goes crazy. I mean, the fact that someone running for president has to address the Jerusalem issue is pretty something. But he makes that claim. He says, it'll never be divided. And then he changes his tune as soon as he gets into office, and he says, you know what, they really got to go back to those pre-67 lines, and those two parties are going to have that arranged. We're not really going to have anything to do with it. And that has been, again, the burdensome stone for all nations. Now, I just want to address we'll wrap up the Palestinian problem. Last week we talked about Palestine, how it was basically an invented place, an invented people. There are no Palestinians, right? They're Arabs. And what's their problem? Why didn't they take all these deals? It's what they've been crying for. They want Jerusalem. They want the West Bank. It was offered to them, but they didn't want it. Remember we looked at last time when they controlled, and the Muslims controlled during the Ottoman Empire and previously Jerusalem, and they just ignored it? When the Jordanians took it in 1948, it became a wasteland. They've always ignored it. So what is their problem? What do they really want? Well,
Eradication.
Golda Meir, prime minister in the early 70s of Israel, put it very well. We can forgive the Arabs for killing our children. We cannot forgive them for forcing us to kill their children. We will only have peace with the Arabs when they love their children more than they hate us. Put quite well. It's all about hate. It's not about a land dispute. It's hatred of the Jew disguised as a land dispute. That's what it's all about.
It was amazing, Butch, when Israel attacked, this is a few years back, when they bombed the Palestinians, and it was found out they killed a lot of women and children in their bombings.
Yep.
That Israel was, the world looked down upon them, and then it was found out years later, and there was no big deal made of it. Well, the Arabs placed all this military, their bombs and their armies in schools and in where women and children would be.
Yeah.
And they got all the sympathy because of it.
It's exactly what they do
had
today.
no thought at all for their own
They
people.
use their children
Yeah.
as human shields.
They do.
Because they're not trying to win a conventional war. They're trying to win public support. And so when you can say, oh, they killed our children, poor us, it's a genocide, it's the Holocaust all over again. Look what they've done. So she puts it quite well.
Yeah.
And, you know, and the world said during the Gaza war, said to Israel, hey, listen, can you take it easy on them? I know that they're bombing you, but if they throw 2 bombs, just throw 2 back. Don't get carried away. You're doing too much. Hello, it's a war. Right? Israel dropped pamphlets. Get out. We're going to attack. And the Palestinian leaders say to their people, don't leave. We need you guys' bodies to pile up. Stay right there. It's the only way we're going to gain public sympathy. Burden of Jerusalem, 2015. The UN criticized the Israeli government for approving the building of 900 new homes in East Jerusalem. Israel's determination to continue its settlement policy despite the urging of the international community not to only threatens the viability of a 2-state solution, but also calls into question commitment to negotiate with the Palestinians. The settlements are illegal under international law. So the fact that they're building in East Jerusalem and the international community saying, nope, you can't do that, burdensome stone. God bringing the nations together, and as we saw before, Jerusalem is going to be the kindling for that fire, for that major event. Yeah, so let's just take a look. I think we'll just take a look at a couple more things here. So the world is calling for pre-67 lines. Go back to those, and that requires them to give up parts of Jerusalem and to give up the West Bank. But when we look at Bible prophecy, that's not going to happen. So let's take a look at Ezekiel 38. So Ezekiel 38, in verse 8, it says, after many days thou shalt be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword. 1948, right? And is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel. Now the mountains of Israel, that's the West Bank, which have always been waste, but is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. And if we go over to chapter 39, beginning in verse 1, it says, therefore, thou son of man, prophesy against Gog, and say, and thus say the Lord God, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the prince chief of Meshach and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and leave but the 6th part of thee, and will cause thee to come up from the north parts, and will bring thee upon the mountains of Israel. Again, the West Bank. They're referred to as the mountains of Israel, not the mountains of the Palestinians or Jordan. And I will smite thy bow out of thy left hand, and will cause thy arrows to fall out of the right. And thou shalt fall upon the mountains of Israel. Again, the West Bank. Israel will be in control of the West Bank. They're not going to give it up. Now let's go to Zechariah. Zechariah chapter 14. So when we couple these two prophecies together, we'll see that Israel's not going to give this up without a fight. Zechariah 14, starting in verse 1, it says, Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. He's speaking about land there. He's talking about Jerusalem. It's going to be divided in the midst of you. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. And the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from this city. So we see that the mountains of Israel, the West Bank, are going to be in Israel possession. And the spoil, the land, which is Jerusalem, only half of the city will be taken. But they're going to fight for the other half. And that's where the holy sites are. And they're not going to give up, and they're going to fight because, God always leaves a remnant, right? A lot of people are going to die. It's going to be a terrible event. But there's going to be a new Jerusalem. And we'll just finish with one more passage in Revelation. And this is what God's leading to. Mankind wants this temporary peace, even with with the Iran nuclear deal, right? It's going to be peace and security for like 10 years. That's what we figure. And then what? Right? But God's looking for a real, true peace. So if we look at Revelation 21, starting in verse 2, it talks about the new Jerusalem. And we'll just finish with this on a positive note. This is what we're looking forward to, brothers and sisters, and the day is coming quickly. It says, And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven, saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. And God himself shall be with them, and be their God. Remember we talked about how God desired Jerusalem. It was going to be where he was going to be. It's his city. And here, this is where he's going to be. And in verse 4, how comforting is this? And he shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. So this is the Jerusalem that we look for, right? And hopefully very soon that will come.